I think it is true that we have lost a genuine sense of history of the past and at the same time any genuine sense of an achievable future, and this is dangerous. Why it has happened, maybe because of the collapse of secular ideologies of progress, but maybe also because of the saturation of our awareness by 24-hour imageries which, so to speak, accelerate our perceptions and thoughts. But whatever the cause, it's dangerous, because if we simply live in a kind of present tense, then we will be trapped into making mistakes which have been made in the past. So I think the being trapped in the present, which is understood as a kind of postmodern fate, is in fact an impoverishing condition. It would be better if we could recover a genuine sense of history and a genuine sense of achievable future. I think there's no doubt that human expansion on the Earth is destroying species at an extraordinary and unparalleled rate. It's a species destruction on a level probably not seen for 55 million years, when there was the last great wipeout of species as a result of some kind of planetary catastrophe. So I certainly take speciesism to be a dangerous reality, and I also take very seriously the need for a more ecocentric view of the world, a more ecocentric morality, and even a more ecocentric politics. How this can be achieved includes using technology more intelligently, but it also includes facing up to a very unfashionable fact, which is that the present level of human numbers in the world, the present number of human beings in the world, and even more, the number of human beings who will probably exist 50 years from now, from 6 billion to 9 billion, a 50% increase in 50 years. That level is really incompatible with the flourishing of other species. So we have to find ways, peaceful and humane ways, of allowing the population to shrink. So in fact, in this respect, there is a harmony between the interests of the planet and the interests of the human species.
Well, when I was young, when I started to be interested in music, it was still the days of vinyl. I never bought a lot of vinyl records because, first of all, they were too heavy for me to collect. I always preferred to record music to cassette tapes. Also, By this means, I would be able to change the sequence of music, to make my own story. And I think that right now we live in times of artificial panic concerning copyright. It's basically the big corporations that back then when the CD was invented, they made a lot of money re-releasing back catalogs of artists that they already owned at the time on CD. But they sort of neglected a very important thing, that is investing the money that they made in new talent, new concepts, in producing new material. They didn't do that. Music in general, I mean, it's a social thing. You play together, you communicate. For me, it's not a priority to think about how to protect that. Of course, I need to make a living with what I do, but it's not my foremost concern to block anyone off, keep somebody outside of the room where I'm playing my music. You know, that's, for me, it's my priority to get more people into that room. And ultimately, that's the only way I will be able to survive, is to have more and more people that are on the same wavelength to listen to my music. Yeah.
Because things change, we can see that copyright exists since a little more than a century, maybe 2 centuries. In the Western world, so it came and it can disappear. And it will disappear because when you look around, you see that many people, millions of people don't obey to it. For the industry it is hard to implement it, to maintain it. The only thing the industry can do is to criminalize you, but it does not work. So it will fall apart. The big question is, and the more important question is, who will control our cultural expressions? Is it more democratic, or will there be other mechanisms in which just a few stockholders and their enterprises will control what we may say, what we will read, what we will think?
What we see around the world, that even as water goes scarce, systems of water use are promoted that abuse the water. If you look at the huge explosion of tourism in the dry areas of Spain, requiring rerouting of the rivers, it mimics the rerouting of India's rivers to meet the needs of exploding industry and exploding cities. Or agriculture, which should not be a waster of water. Ecological agriculture actually produces clean water, conserves water, but industrial agriculture guzzles water. And I see in Spain the increase of water-intensive agriculture even as the water crisis deepens. We need to turn towards prudence in our water use. We need to live as if the last drop of water is the drop we are using. Our agriculture must reflect it, our cities must reflect it, our everyday lives must reflect it. Every part of the world faces a water crisis. Every part of the world must respond responsibly.
Well, to me, we're at a very paradoxical moment because even if we just think about 8 years ago and the big debates about globalization, or even 7 years ago, before September 11th, there used to be people who would really defend very fiercely this neoliberal model of privatization, deregulation, cuts to spending. And now all those people seem to have disappeared. Nobody will really defend the theory. It advances, and in fact, a more radical vision of neoliberalism advances with the privatization privatization of the military, the privatization of disaster response, but you can't really find anyone who will defend any of it. In fact, it all goes under the banner of security and fortress and anti-terrorism. So it is a moment, I think, of opportunity for people who believe in another vision of the world. It's an opportunity that should be seized with great confidence and great urgency, because wild capitalism is not triumphing because it is in a position of intellectual strength. It's in a position of great weakness.
You know, I've often thought it's very ironic that I'm able to do all this, and yet what am I on? I'm on networks, I'm distributed by studios that are owned by large corporate entities. Now, why would they put me out there when I am opposed to everything that they stand for? And I spend my time on their dime opposing what they believe in, okay? Well, it's because they don't believe in anything. They put me on there because they know that there's millions of people that want to see my film or watch the TV show, and so they're going to make money. And I've been able to get my stuff out there because I'm driving my truck through this incredible flaw in capitalism, the greed flaw, the thing that says the rich man will sell you the rope to hang himself with if he thinks he can make a buck off it. Well, I'm the rope. I hope. I'm part of the rope. And they also believe that when people watch my stuff or maybe watch this film or whatever, they think that, you know, well, you know what, they'll watch this and they won't do anything, you know, because we've done such a good job of numbing their minds and dumbing them down. You know, they'll never affect anything. The people aren't going to leave the couch and go and do something political. They're convinced of that. I'm convinced of the opposite. I'm convinced that a few people are going to leave this movie theater or get up off the couch and go and do something, anything, to get this world back in our hands.
Bob Wood, National Program Director of the Chum Group, worked with us in producing...
Art now is in a very confusing, a little bit chaotic time, because I think the traditional arts have fallen behind. They've been afraid to accept this integration of technologies in our culture. So there's big questions. Suddenly there's no such thing with digital art. There's no such thing as an original. So the whole art market is confused about, you know, where is the original art object? There's often no object anymore. Some of the art is virtual, so the art world has to try to understand that. And art has tried to, I think, follow popular culture now, but not so much lead popular culture. There's been a trend in art to be more and more sensationalist, like the popular media is more and more sensationalist. But I think that somehow, after a while, just seems empty, just to have art as sensation. I think now we may be entering a time in art where maybe art will speak to society more. There were times in the past where artists were concerned with society and how society would adapt to present conditions. Is that the sync?
Break down, baby.
I think today's art only partially exists in the museum institutions, maybe 2%. The rest is on the fringes, and perhaps what characterizes it the most is that it's decentralized. So New York, London, Paris, even Los Angeles being brought in as the center is ridiculous. Los Angeles is a perfect example of how it cannot be a center, and they're talking about it as the new art spot. The decentralization is what characterizes our whole globalization and what's happening to the planet. So I think that network art and art that's on the net and that somehow uses networks is where it resides. Whether it manifests on a physical plane or in institutions is secondary, but I don't believe that there's any more centralized art world, no matter how hard they're trying to convince us that there is.
Beats that you never heard. 1990. Put a smile on your face like ultra bright.
You're just fessing, man. I don't even want to hear about it. You're just fessing.
So the relationship between art, science, and technology in Europe, I think now is different and more pronounced. Perhaps because Europe has supported art and culture more than in the US, and there's more of an interest to see what that relationship would be. Where in the US, science and technology have been so important, and the role of the artist is a lot smaller, which I think is certainly a problem in the innovation of science and technology. It's always been a mission of mine to, I think, to infiltrate as an artist into the world of science and technology, because right now there isn't enough artistic and innovative thinking in science and art. in science and technology. There's also, in history, art has separated a bit from science and technology. They were seen as science, technology as rational thinking, and art as not rational thinking. So we have the scientific world afraid of including the arts, and the artistic world afraid of too much science and technology. And I think only this past year, starting maybe even just 1 year ago, there's been a more general understanding by all of these worlds and the popular culture, the world of popular culture, of understanding how all of these things may start to influence each other more. So maybe this is a new, interesting beginning of trying to truly integrate the science, technology, art thinking.
Precisely because that is where social change happens. And there's an old debate about whether or not technological change causes social change or social change causes technological change, and we spend a lot of time discussing that, which is irrelevant. We all know, in fact, that where technological change happens, there's social change.
My definition of music now, and my definition of music always, is that it is an universal language. Music is a way of connecting people of very different backgrounds and attitudes in the same rhythm, and music is a way of transporting feelings and therefore transporting truth. Anyway, I think that any art form is only means of transport for truth. And that's how I would judge good art or good music, if it manages to be a form of transport for its ultimate goal, the transport of truth. Yeah.
We would hope that artists will present the world as complex as it is. There's a tendency to make things quite simple, maybe banal. And my desire is to see works of art, plenty of works of art, that tell us about the complexity, about also the pleasure, about the contradictions, and that we learn a little bit from it. And when we see the work, that we enjoy it as well.
Our reality is syncretic. And by that, I should define syncretic more precisely a little bit later on in my interpretation of it. But what I'm saying is that we live in many realities at the same time. Realities created by the media, virtual realities, mixed reality technologies. We're working with different kinds of models, ontological models, philosophical models, political. I mean, there's such a range of ways that come together that we have to navigate. So we have to think about these things, in my view, syncretically, and I propose to talk about that. Our media is moist. By that I mean briefly that computational systems, which are silicon dry, are converging with wet biological systems. Our mind is technoetic. That's to say our cognitive processes, our perception is augmented, is extended by technology. We see deeper, we see further into space, we see deeper down to molecules, but we also multitask. We multitask, and we multitask a lot faster than we might have done 30 years ago. And our body is transformable. We recognize that it's malleable. Our identity, too, is changeable. We can decide how we will be and what we will be, and we're making every effort to be sure that we master that, both, biologically as well as intellectually and so forth. And finally, our planet is telematic. You'll know that even at the level of internet, but when we're talking about the massive kind of connectivity that exists between political powers, between military powers, between academic powers, on all kinds of levels of society, everything is now working on a planetary dimension.
Peer-to-peer, back-to-back, you and me, multi-source interaction. On the internet, every one of you, your child or student at home, can be a producer. So with this introduction of new technology, we have changed our life so much.
At the beginning was the internet of computer scientists. This is the people of programming.
So essentially, the kind of application that started the internet was email, FTP, telnet. This is the technology internet. They become the internet of scientists, the mathematical and literate people. This is at the moment we have just in this moment. The kind of applications we mainly use are the web. But is it possible a new third moment, this is what we call the internet of arts and cultures, the internet of vocal and visual people. And from the anthropological viewpoint, it's very important to have not only the audio-visual internet, but the speech and visual internet, and open up to the internet of languages. Because with the tools we have now in the internet, it's impossible to achieve this dream of overcome the digital divide. Because hundreds of millions of people cannot read. They only can talk. If we don't have an internet for the languages, we cannot protect this, we cannot overcome this kind of digital barrier. If we don't open this kind of third internet, the internet will not be the knowledge society network. It will be only the knowledge network for some kind of communities, but not for everyone.
If you look at the difference between the web in 1995 and the web, or even the web in 1998, and the web in 2005, 2006, so a period of about 8 years. If you go from, kind of pre-Google web to YouTube, if you look at like the change in basic features, the basic things that the medium is capable of in that 8-year period, it is fundamentally like a much more dramatic change in the basic capabilities of the medium than the shift from radio to television. So like, 1997, the web is basically like text-based pages with some graphics, no video or audio really in any real way. You connect to pages, there's kind of some level of interactivity, but not that much. Fast forward to YouTube, you've got video, you've got audio, you've got sharing, you've got the ability to upload and form little collaborative filtering webs and put a video right on your page and do all that kind of stuff. Radio to television is, you've got sound, you've got a channel, you can switch and you've got programs. Television is just like you've got a picture, you've got sound, you've got a channel, you switch between programs, So we've made, it took 30 years for the culture to kind of figure out this evolution from radio to TV. We've done much more on the web in the space of 7 years, basically. So that's one place in which there is a lot of acceleration, and there's no reason to think that it's not going to continue on some level. So I would say yes, probably we are in the infancy on some point. I think one area where we're going to see major changes, the connection between the real world and real world geography and the web, and it's going to become much more commonplace for objects in the real world to be geocoded in some way, places, objects, so that they're in a sense machine readable. And whether that's just being able to kind of walk around in a new neighborhood and see all the conversations that are happening in that neighborhood because your device knows where you are and it knows where those conversations are on some level. Or just walking through a store and having RFID and being able to pull down all the information because those objects in the store have some kind of internet presence on some level. All those things are clearly going to happen. And I would imagine that those, in terms of the perceived change, those are going to be pretty important changes, probably more significant than the initial kind of advent of the web.